This is quite a big softbox for my small home studio, but it's the perfect choice, I think, for today's session, because today I'm going to be doing not just a studio session, but post-processing, because sometimes you can't get it right in camera. For example, maybe you want to swap out this paper grey background, which is perfectly fine, for something with a bit more texture. You can do that in post-processing, or maybe you want to add a bit more of a outdoor feel. I can add that in as well, and that's exactly what we're going to do in today's session. I always find if you know that post-processing is going to be part of the session and you can pre-plan it into your day, then the end result is always better. So I'm going to be doing two sessions. The first one's going to be a simple texture that I'm going to take away this grey background and add that texture in. Sounds complicated, it's actually quite straightforward. And then I'll ramp it up a little bit with a bit more lighting and a slightly more complicated background and create a sort of fine art look, or at least that's the idea. Now to do it, I think I'm going to need, well, this light and probably one more. So let's get a light set, let's get a model in, let's get shooting. To help me out today, I've got the amazing Chloe. Chloe's going to be the model for this photo session, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is actually the background, because the most important part of this is using a neutral background. I've gone with a grey background here. You'll find links in the video description to what I'm using. A white background or a black background is going to give you problems in post-processing. And then you need a theme. I've got a couple of themes to play with. This is the first one. We've got some cranes flying through the air. Chloe's going to be holding a cage. You get the idea. So what about the lighting? Well, I need a couple of things. I need this grey background to have light on it so it doesn't go to real deep shadow. So I've positioned the flash directly in front of Chloe. Up there is a Flashpoint XPLOR300. It's at 1/8 power. Let's take a test photo and see what we get. Okay, Chloe, here we go. And my goal of having a grey background is achieved, but what I've lost with this lighting position is any actual shadow and contrast on Chloe. What I'm going to do is actually reposition the light over to the side, so it's coming in around about 45 degrees from where we were before. Now that should, in theory, put a little bit more shadow onto the background. And I know I said I don't want any real deep shadows, but we can lift it slightly in post. But also, the shadows that I create are actually going to appear in the final picture. We're only going to add a texture to this image, not change it completely. So, let's see how this looks. Okay, Chloe, here we go. And yeah, there is a shadow behind Chloe. There is still light on most of the background where it needs to be, and everything else I can lift in Photoshop just to brighten those shadows, so when I apply the texture, it's going to appear realistic. Okay, well that's pretty much everything set for this. It's as easy as that. So Chloe, are you ready? Okay, let's take a few pictures like this. Yeah, they're definitely going to be vertical, these photos. With the photography done, it's time to move into Photoshop for the first look. Now, some things are going to be generic and some things are going to be specific. You're unlikely to be adding a paper crane into a cage, but you are likely to be adding a texture onto the picture, which is the whole purpose of this. So let's go to Select and All, Edit and Copy, go back to the main picture and choose Edit and Paste, and just reposition and resize as required. Now to blend these images together, I'm just going to use the layer blending modes, and there are lots to choose from. They all work differently. Choose one that's closest to the final result, and for me soft light looks pretty close. Now when you add a texture in, it does go everywhere, and straight off you can see how this is working well. That grey paper is really absorbing the texture very well, but then so is Chloe's skin tones, and that looks wrong. So we need to fix that bit. I'm going to switch off the other two layers, just leave my texture on screen, and sample a colour that's, well, let's call it a mid-tone. It's not exact, but let's call it a mid-tone.
And then all I'm going to do is just get a paintbrush, make it nice and big, and make the edges nice and soft. And I'm just going to paint that colour onto Chloe, except it's not onto Chloe, it's on the texture layer. And although it does change her skin tones ever so slightly, it removes the texture. So I'm kind of happy with that. That looks pretty good. It's not exact science, but that's good enough for what we need. Now everything feels just a little bit too saturated in color, so I'm going to go down and apply a adjustment layer. Let's use Vibrance, that's nice and simple, just to take the color down a little bit overall. And I could stop there, except I think I want just another adjustment layer. Let's put a color lookup in to take away some of the real warmth, because everything is warm on this picture. Horror Blue normally does, oh, that's quite strong. It does the job, but that's a little bit too strong. So let's knock that right back. I just want that little bit of tone, and you see that it's got that slight blue tone. And when you look in close, this looks totally convincing, because I knew that the grey background would work well with post-processing and absorb the texture and make it look like it was always there. The shadow behind Chloe looks real because it is a real shadow behind Chloe. This is a very convincing and fairly straightforward technique, so let's see if we can take it up a notch.
So this time we've changed Chloe's hairstyle a little bit. It's a bit more flowing, and also a bit more flowing is the extra fabric we've added to Chloe's dress. That's going to become useful in a little bit, because rather than being inside with a textured background, I'm taking it up a level, and now we're going to make Chloe look like she's outside in a stylized kind of way. The thing I haven't changed is the lighting. It's still the same as it was before. It's worth trying the same lighting in this scenario to see how it looks. Let's just take a test photo now and see what we get. Okay, Chloe, here we go. And just like before, it looks rather nice, except this time the photo we're going to add in the background is more photographic rather than texture. It needs to look like Chloe's actually outside, and that shadow behind Chloe, well, that would look really wrong when we merge the two images together. So we need to think about getting rid of the shadow, and the easiest way to do that would just be to move Chloe forward away from the background so the shadow doesn't fall on the background. So what I'm going to do is actually move my lights around. So the key light is almost going to act like a hair light. I want it to come in slightly behind because the picture I'm using is brighter in the background, so I want that feel to come through. I think we're going to need more than one light, but if you're doing multiple lights, it's always a good idea to test them one at a time. And this gives me quite strong contrast, things we can fix with one light. And that light is going to be this one right here. It's an Evolve 200. It doesn't need to be too powerful because I don't want it to overpower the other light. I just want it to fill in the shadows. So I'm going to point it at the back wall of my studio and just bounce light around to give this as a fill light effect. And that light on its own also looks kind of wrong, but when you combine the two together, they work beautifully to give me a reasonably evenly toned background. And that is really going to help with the post-processing. And the final piece of the puzzle is a little bit of movement, because that's what's going to make this feel more dynamic. So we're going to have a little bit of movement in Chloe's hair, a bit of movement in the dress using the studio's leaf blower. So yeah, I think we're kind of ready to go. So Chloe, are you ready for this? Okay, let's take some photos.
So this one requires a little bit more work, and I've done a bit of pre-preparation again, things that you're probably not going to have to do, like deciding to add in a lot more red fabric to cover up Sam. That makes life a lot easier. So in this case, that means I don't have to worry about Chloe's feet, which is really good, but I do have to worry about not having enough background. So what I'm going to do is make a brand new layer. Let's make a new layer, click the little plus button, and I'm going to sample the grey colour. I think that's sort of middle of the road grey, something like that, and just paint grey over the softbox, over the white wall. Doesn't have to be an exact match, but something close would be good. So that, believe it or not, is good enough for what I need to do. So the next step is no different to the previous edit. I'm going to go and get that same texture again. Select and select all, edit and copy, and I'll paste that in with a bit of edit and paste. Now this time it's a bit on the small side, so let's make it a little bit bigger with free transform, Control T, Command T on a Mac, just to stretch that out. There we go. Click on the tick to commit, and then change the blending mode. Again, any of them will work. We knew soft light worked before, it works again. But there is color, which I actually really like, and texture, which I really don't like. So I could remove it as I did before. The other way is just to go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur, and really go to town with the blur, sort of in the 40s, something like that. That'll just smooth out that texture, that detail, but keep the little blobs of light, which is actually what I want, and the color. Okay, now this was supposed to have a more realistic background, and this is the one I've chosen. So I'm going to go to Select and All, Edit and Copy, back to the picture, Edit and Paste. This time it fits fine, that's a bit of luck. And then I'm going to change the blending mode. Again, I can choose any of the different blending modes, choose one that looks pretty close to the final effect, which is soft light once again. Now, I could stop here. It kind of works, but it's just too sharp in the background. So I'm going to blur the background. Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. It'll only blur the active layer, which is the background. That's way too much because I can't see what it is anymore. So I'm thinking, yeah, between 10 and 12 for this particular image. Yeah, that looks pretty good. That gives me a depth of field effect, which I really like, but I can still see a bit of, there's something odd going on Chloe's arm, and I can see it coming through the fabric. So once again, let's just go for this layer on its own. Let's sample a mid-grayish color, something like that. Actually, it is pretty gray, isn't it, when I look at it? And then I'm going to paint that color and that color only onto Chloe's arms. There we go, that onto her face. I think it's actually fine on her face. Onto her other arm. Okay, now I could stop there. I could apply another color lookup, but if you want to take this to another level, consider using third-party software. And my favorite for this sort of work is Nik software. And there you go, that gives me the finished look that I was after, of a realistic background with a fine art feel, all taken in my studio. Post-processing is something that as photographers we probably do on, well, pretty much every single photo. Even if you don't necessarily call it post-processing or class it as post-processing, I suspect you do. Now what I did today was definitely post-processing. I wasn't trying to disguise it. In fact, I rather enjoyed it. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave me a comment down below, even if it's just the thumbs up emoji. It really helps with the algorithm. Click on the bell icon and you'll never miss a video right here on Adorama TV. And of course, remember to click on the subscribe button. I'm Gavin Hoey. Thanks for watching.